So today I'm here with Scott Benton MP for Blackpool South. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me.
Pleasure, lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Right, so I'm just going to go straight in for the kill. I'm up here talking to people about energy poverty, fuel poverty, the cost of living, how policies that have been implemented by the government and other things that have been going on are impacting on the front line, so to speak. One of the reasons that we chose Blackpool is because there was a point, not until quite recently, where you were going to be having potentially a thriving industry in terms of fracking, and that didn't happen. So that's one of the reasons that we've come to this area, and we wanted to talk to you about that as well. But I was in Amazing Grace last night. Do you know about Amazing Grace?
I do.
Yeah.
I've been to Amazing Grace on many, many occasions. They do a brilliant job helping vulnerable people out with food support, wraparound support for homeless people as well. So they really are a stellar charity, and a tribute to Mark Butcher and Abby Butcher,
great.
who have set it up.
He's a character, isn't he?
He certainly is a character. He's got strong views on a number of different things, and he certainly keeps the council here on their toes regarding a number of things around provision for homeless people. So
Absolutely.
we certainly need more people like him in the community.
No, definitely. But I mean, it really opened my eyes, because we hear the heat or eat thing all the time. And people, let's be honest, people that are talking about it on television, they probably don't know anybody who's actually having to make that choice. And they certainly,
I think that's very true.
Yeah, but I actually spoke to people when I was at Amazing Grace that one person had to switch their fridge off to save electricity, and they had children, the food poisoning, things like that. But the thing that really, really upset me actually was I heard a story about a young woman that had a baby, 19, 20-year-old girl, who her electric was about to run out on the meter, and she went and worked as a street prostitute for the first time 2 weeks ago to keep the electric on. It's just absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? It's very, very upsetting. So
it certainly is. I mean, that story there is absolutely horrific. In terms of Blackpool, we are one of the most deprived communities in the whole country for a number of different reasons, going back to our success years ago as a seaside resort. That's left a legacy of empty hotels, empty bed and breakfast, which have been taken over by landlords who've offered cheap housing. That's been attractive to people in different parts of the country who've come to Blackpool as a bit of a mecca for somewhere which is so cheap to live. Unfortunately, that has created a number of different social problems, which explains why pretty much any socio-demographic statistic, whether it be poor life expectancy, poor health, poor qualifications, job prospects, we are unfortunately bottom of the list. So we have huge challenges, and when the government talks about levelling up, ultimately, that's places like Blackpool who are very much at the forefront of that challenge, which is why we've seen so much government investment come in here. But of course, that's a longer term ambition about improving people's life chances, health, education, job prospects. It doesn't happen overnight. In the background with COVID, rampant inflation worldwide, economic challenges has obviously proved difficult for many people.
I completely agree with what you're saying, but when you've got an emphasis at the moment with this government, and it's across all of the political parties, with this extraordinary zealotry for net zero, and then you're speaking to ordinary people who can't afford their energy bills. And I know a lot of stuff has been blamed on the Ukraine war, but actually energy bills were going up incredibly before then. I mean, I've just got a statistic here. I think it said that 90%, the gas prices have gone up by 90% before the Ukraine war, and electricity, obviously, which is dependent on gas, went up 2 to 3 times in the year before the Ukraine war. I know that everybody's blaming everything on that, but a lot of the reason for these increases are to do with the pursuit of an ideology, I believe, anyway, at all costs. And when you actually talk to people on the ground, they can't believe that politicians in Westminster are putting an ideology ahead of them being able to feed their kids and turn the heating on. I mean, a couple of days ago, I was reading about an 87-year-old woman who died of hypothermia because she couldn't afford to heat her home. And we're talking about 1.5 degrees increase in the global temperature from 150 years ago. I mean, you can see why ordinary people think they totally don't care about us politicians.
Absolutely. I appreciate the point you are making, and that story about elderly people being conscious of putting their heating on because of rampant energy prices, that is completely unacceptable. I'll come on to the climate issue in a second, if I may, but it's important to remember the support the government are providing to households. So don't forget, last year, vulnerable households received nearly £1,000 extra on top of a generous welfare state, which is very generous, by the way, by international comparisons. This year, those same vulnerable households will receive almost £1,000 worth of support, and pensioners nearly that amount too. So the government is putting money where its mouth is to support vulnerable households.
But as a Tory, you must be annoyed about handing money out.
Well,
let's be honest, it is ideologically opposed to what you as a Conservative would think.
I absolutely agree, which brings me back to your point on climate change. On the Conservative benches, I'm one of a few what I would call climate sceptics.
Right.
I really am. Let's not forget, this country amounts for 1% of global emissions.
Absolutely
Anything we do to cut back on our CO2 emissions is more than dwarfed by the likes of Indonesia, China, India, Brazil, who continue to pump out emissions day after day. So the idea that the UK cutting back and being net zero in a couple of decades' time is going to stop the sea levels rising is absolutely preposterous.
If indeed they are rising, because a lot of people think that they're not.
Well, absolutely, and I have a bit of sympathy with that exact view myself.
Yeah.
So the idea that we can cure climate change ourselves is completely preposterous, and we have to get real. And that's why, for example, I was one of the supporters of scrapping green energy levies on energy bills, and also VAT as well. But the simple fact of the matter is we are in this position because for decades all governments, blue and red, have failed continuously to provide the energy security this country needs. Why didn't we advance with nuclear, for example, decades ago?
Well, why did you oppose fracking then? Why did you oppose fracking that would have brought jobs and energy security and possibly no energy bills for your constituents? Why?
Well, it's an interesting point. We are one of the few
that
areas...
doesn't go with what you're saying.
Well, firstly on fracking, let's not forget if you started fracking tomorrow, it would take years for that to come online. So it's not an instant solution. That's the first thing to remember.
Okay, but then nuclear would have been...
Well, true.
Yeah, Nick Clegg was famously filmed 10 years ago saying, there's no point doing nuclear because
it wouldn't be online by 2022.
But you're like, well, hello.
Which is where we are.
Here we are.
No,
yeah.
I absolutely accept that. That's not an excuse for not pursuing different sources of energy. But the second issue on fracking is, even if we started that, there's an argument about how much it would actually affect the international gas price anyway, which we draw down on.
Yeah, I spoke to Francis Egan about that, and he disputed that.
It's not a solution to all of our ills. Let's not forget, it's only a number of months ago the Conservative Party were looking at investigating fracking opportunities.
Well, they lifted the moratorium. Well, it was lifted with local consent,
absolutely,
which you supported.
We were looking at those opportunities as a party. I've got different views on fracking as a local MP. So this is the sort of conundrum we have locally. So if you speak to people on the streets of Blackpool, you'll hear people who are aghast about energy prices rising. They're really struggling at the moment. They can't afford it. But then if you ask them the question, would you support fracking? Oh no, I don't want fracking on my doorstep.
Can I just say that hasn't been the case when I've been speaking to people?
With respect, when I speak to constituents, I would estimate 75–80% of residents in Blackpool are against fracking on account of the earthquakes which persisted here a number of years ago when the site only a couple of miles down the road here was tested. So this is a problem with public perception. Everybody wants cheaper energy bills, but people aren't necessarily willing to look at issues and opportunities such as fracking, which could bring those bills down. But as a local MP, I've always been against fracking because my constituents don't support it.
So therefore, if the constituents were in favour of fracking, if they were more educated or in terms of the fact that, for example, it was set at 0.5, which is the same as dropping a bag of sugar onto the floor in terms of a seismic event, if your constituents were in favour of fracking, you would support fracking?
As local MP, I see myself as a delegate. So my job is to represent local opinion in the House of Commons. If I gauge your opinion on fracking had swung tremendously, and for example, the Liz Truss government was talking about an incentive to households.
Did you support Liz Truss?
Which could, well, I'll come on to that in a second. An incentive to reduce people's energy bills in local areas where fracking was carried out. So if a package like that was supported by the community, that's certainly something I would look at. But the perception on the streets of Blackpool would be very much against fracking for some of those reasons I've explained about the problems which happened here.
Okay, well that's really, really interesting to hear that. Thank you. So do you feel that if, for example, companies like Quadrilla reached out to the community and informed them more about about the fact that in America 15 million people live within 1 mile of a fracking site, their energy is 8 times cheaper, it's the most litigious nation in the world, and obviously there wouldn't be fracking if there was any sort of problems because they'd be sued just straight away. So do you think if they did more community outreach work that it might improve the perception? Because we know, don't we, it's been reported in the media that there was definitely a Russian element to the misinformation campaigns around fracking 10 years ago, and all the campaigning groups were funded, at least in part, by Russian money.
I believe that was certainly the case. Fracking is one of these issues where there's huge misunderstanding about what it actually entails. I remember knocking on the door in 2019 during the general election. One lady told me, I don't want fracking here because it will give cancer to my children.
Right, okay.
Which obviously there was a moratorium on fracking from the government at the time, as there now is.
Yeah.
I explained that that wasn't the case, but the perception of what fracking entails is completely different to the reality for many members of the public.
Okay.
There's a larger question here, if I can just expand on this point, not just on fracking, but on HS2, on Heathrow, a third runway, on nuclear power. As a nation, we need to improve our infrastructure. It's one of the reasons economic growth here is so poor. Governments and councils are awful at making long-term decisions to advance the economic performance of this country. Housing, energy, transport infrastructure, whatever that may be. And I'm afraid, this is a bit controversial, but we are a nation of NIMBYs. Everybody wants to get from A to B quicker on the roads.
Yeah.
Everybody wants cheaper energy prices.
Yeah.
Everybody wants a new house for the children, but they don't want it next to them. And it's exactly the same on fracking. And I'm afraid sometimes national governments need to make strategic decisions which benefit the whole country.
And look at it in the round.
They do,
Yeah.
even if that means a few middle-class commuter belts on the edge of Heathrow have disruption with extra flights, for example. Or HS2 goes through lovely villages in the home counties. If it's good for the country, you have to make these big decisions and potentially...
Not any lovely old houses, though. We wouldn't want those to be torn down, would we?
Well, no, absolutely. And
no,
people, of course, get...
Because that's our heritage.
People get compensated for any developments on their land, and rightly so. But the point I'm making is, as a country, look at how China do things. Now, that's an extreme example, but we are so...
China do lots of other things that we wouldn't support, obviously.
They do, but and
you mean in
America,
terms of getting things done?
In terms of getting things done,
right, okay.
Airport building, energy plant building, they're second to none. And I'm afraid we are probably bottom of the international competitive league table at this. We are absolutely useless at getting major infrastructure projects off the ground, and something has to change, whether that be housing, transport or whatever.
No, we definitely need to be building more houses. But actually that goes back to another point, because you're talking about the construction industry. In terms of seismic events, earthquakes in inverted commas, the traffic light system that was brought in by Ed Davey for the fracking industry was deliberately, he's even admitted this recently, was deliberately set so low, so basically it was going to be dead in the ground before it even started. But if you compare it to the other, how should I word this? If you compare it to the seismic events that are allowed to happen in the construction industry and everything, which are much, much higher, if they had to use the same traffic light system, there would be no road building, there would be no HS2. I mean, the tremors and things that have been felt from those kind of activities are extraordinarily large compared to anything that's been felt from fracking. But that's just another point. So you were going to come back to the thing about Liz Truss. Did you support Liz Truss?
Well, I voted for Liz to be Conservative Party leader at the time for a number of different reasons. I think people will reflect on that 2-month period of her premiership at various points over the next few decades with different opinions. What I will say about Liz is we've just been speaking about the infrastructure challenges, economic growth.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody understood the need for economic growth and turbocharging our economy to head off the potential recession which we could be experiencing soon. more than Liz Truss. Liz got that more than anybody. I think she had admired Lady Thatcher and saw the tax cuts in the 1980s and the way they revolutionised Britain. She appreciated that we can't keep taxing people to the hilt.
Where's the money going to come from?
And then spending money on public services, which, let's be honest, aren't up to scratch. So this broken model of the last 20 years of higher and higher taxes, giving the NHS more and more money without reforming the public services as a whole, that needs to change. Liz appreciated that. The criticism of Liz, and fairly and rightly so, was she did too much too quickly. She didn't have the political support. She didn't have the economic conditions to advance tax cuts on
Do you not think she might have been ganged up on, though? That there was not a conspiracy, but that the various institutions might have conspired to make sure that she was got rid of. That's what I think.
I think there's an argument about that. She did.
They wanted Rishi in. He was one of theirs.
She did break Treasury orthodoxy. The model she was advocating of low taxation across the economy clearly upset people who had vested interests, so that was part of it. There were colleagues in the Conservative Party who wouldn't have accepted Liz as leader and undermined her from day one as well. But there were fundamental decisions which Liz got wrong. The 45p tax rate, for example, looking to cut taxes on high earners at a time
but that
when...
generates... But you're an intelligent man, that it creates more wealth when you cut taxes.
It does. Do I support reducing top rates of tax? 100%. Right. However, the political optics and priorities of doing so in the middle of a cost of living crisis when my constituents are struggling, that was politically foolish, even though economically it was probably the correct thing to do for the country. So again, not just as Prime Minister, you are running the country, but the political ramifications of decisions you make. And that was one, just to quote one example, which backfired tremendously on the Conservative Party.
Even though you believe that it was actually the right thing to do, it was the wrong optics.
Absolutely, it was correct. It was the correct thing to do for the country, but the political optics of it were wrong. And I'm afraid we are politicians as much as we are custodians and CEOs of the United Kingdom as a whole. And number 10 Downing Street. So you've got to balance the two.
No, it's a shame, isn't it? Because a lot of the members of the public wouldn't understand if something is better for the country, then surely it should be done. The whole optics argument, I get it, you get it, obviously, but would be lost on the majority of people.
I think that's a very, very fair comment. And again, this gets to the heart of maybe why Liz exited number 10 Downing Street so quickly. The PR machine wasn't up to speed, I'm afraid. If you're going to announce a huge package of tax cuts and changes at a budget, you need to be on the front foot, defending those, explaining those to the general public, just on the lines you have. This is why we are doing this, because it's the correct thing to do for the country. And I'm afraid there's a void from CCHQ and number 10 to support the decisions around around the budget. If we'd have been quicker doing that, the situation and the story could have been very, very
So the communications broke down or weren't very good in the first place. That's what you think that was her downfall?
I think that was partly the explanation for it as well. But I would say this about Liz. Nobody understood the challenges this country faces better than Liz. And I think she genuinely wanted those policies to succeed. And I think we may look differently on her premiership in a few years than we do at the moment.
Going back to the whole net zero thing, it does seem, Boris Johnson's dad's been on TV saying, we need to be flying less and we need to be doing this and doing that. And there are lots of airports that seem to be being closed all around the country at the moment, including your local airport.
Absolutely.
How's it going? Because you campaigned on the ticket of getting it reopened. I understand it's been used recently, but only by a private plane with Rishi Sunak in it. Is that right? That's not very good for net zero, is it?
Well, I'll unpack a number of different things in this question. My views on net zero, I've just spoken to you about. I'm very sceptical of that. Should we reduce air flying as a society? I would say no. People work hard, 365 days a year, they enjoy a holiday, rightly so.
Why shouldn't they go on holiday?
People should be able to fly abroad. The Prime Minister used Blackpool Airport just over my shoulder last week. Well, why not? He's a Prime Minister. Do you expect him to cycle up from London?
Yeah.
Of course you don't. Absolutely preposterous. So I'm generally in favour of more aviation. It's a fraction of our domestic CO2 emissions here as well. And it's a huge driver of economic growth. So you spoke about Blackpool Airport. I would love to see Blackpool Airport reopen for commercial passenger flights. That's one of my main campaigns as a local MP. That has a huge impact on the area, tourists coming in, making it easy for people to fly abroad as well. So I'm generally in favour of that. So whether or not we have to adapt aviation to reduce emissions in the future, of course, we've got electric planes. They've
Would you get in an electric plane?
Well, why not? People getting electric cars. What's the
I know, but it's not going to fall through the road if it runs out of electric, is it?
There may be an argument for that.
My understanding is that the battery that's required is heavier than the actual plane. It wouldn't take off. I worked very closely with a physicist who told me that it just wouldn't. It literally wouldn't get off the ground.
More ways than one, metaphorically as well. Clearly, the technology is in its infancy. I think if we're here in 20 years' time, I would suspect electric planes will probably be a fact of life in a couple of decades. But generally, aviation as a whole, it's a key driver of economic growth.
Yeah.
I think we have to keep things in proportion here. And for goodness sake, as we've just been saying, we are 1% of global CO2 emissions.
Yeah, even if one believes that it's a problem.
Do you think the expanding middle class in China are going to forego their holidays because of CO2 emissions?
No.
I suspect not.
No, and the thing is, we need China to be building all their coal-fired power stations and everything, because they produce all of the wind turbines and the solar panels and the electric vehicles that we apparently are better for the environment.
Quite ironically, they do. Try and
Using
square that
coal,
circle.
it doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
So just, sorry to put you on the spot, but how is it going in terms of getting the airport reopened? Are you making progress?
We are. The government have done a number of things around regional aviation which have been helpful. So they're looking
for this airport?
For this airport.
Yeah.
So they've cut air passenger duty in half. So that's great if you want to fly from Belfast to Blackpool.
Because wasn't there a £10 thing put on it or something? And that's EasyJet left and Ryanair left.
There was. There's two issues here. What the government can do to support regional aviation. So we've got a good record, reducing APD, looking to subsidise domestic aviation, using public service obligation routes. We've done those two. The local scenario here in Blackpool is a position where we have a Labour-run council who own and operate the airport, and potentially for those issues around climate change you've just been alluded to, they are not willing to investigate the brilliant opportunities for our local airport.
So you think it could be driven by net zero ideology?
I think that's partly the concerns of the Labour-run council. There are also concerns about whether or not it would be feasible, whether or not there's private interest from flight operators. I meet flight operators regularly. They would love to run flights to the Isle of Man, to Belfast from Blackpool. So I'm the MP who's chasing up these different opportunities, but the Labour-run council less interested than the general public, who the vast majority of whom live locally, want to see the airport reopen.
So it would be a vote winner?
A huge vote winner.
So why are the Labour Council behaving like that? There is a zealotry with net zero, and I know you've got a theology degree, so I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think it is almost cult-like?
It is cult-like.
Because they're not listening to science. So.
Well, they're listening to one aspect of the science. I mean, the scientific opinion is split on whether or not climate change is actually happening. Even if you accept climate change is happening, which many people don't, there's then an argument about whether or not it's man-made.
Yeah.
So the science
is that almost zealotry?
Well, if you look at people like Greta Thunberg, I think you could argue...
You could say she's like a saint, couldn't you? The equivalent.
Well, some people, certainly Generation Z, for example, would see her as a saint for her work on the climate change, because they've been indoctrinated via the media, the BBC, the mainstream press, in schools about the imminent threat of climate change.
It's actually quite cruel what they're doing to little kids at the moment.
It is quite cruel, and it is quite frightening as well. I've been in schools when people ask, children have asked me, will I still be alive to get a job because the planet will be underwater? That's a comment one school child made to me on a visit to a local school. So again, should we be teaching people about protecting the environment? Yes. Do we have to be extremely careful with how we do so to make sure people don't get the wrong impression and they don't think the sky is going to fall in tomorrow? Absolutely.
It's like a doomsday thing, like a classic doomsday cult.
It does beg that question, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, well, that's very, very interesting. So you are a Red Wall MP. Obviously, there's lots of focus on what's going to happen to the Red Wall at the next election. Are you standing again?
I will be on the ballot paper at the next general election.
Okay, that's marvellous. I'm glad to hear that.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
Whether or not we can maintain the Red Wall is an interesting question. What I would say is the Prime Minister's laid out 5 key objectives this year. If he can deliver on those 5 objectives, we will keep seats like Blackpool South, and we will have an overall majority at the next election. Polls go up, polls go down. Clearly the Conservative Party is in a difficult position, probably the most difficult position we've been for the last 30 years, one could argue. But when we're speaking about issues like tackling small boats, looking to drive those NHS waiting lists down, easing the pressure on the household budgets and creating new jobs via turbocharging the economy. If we can do those 4 things, I will be re-elected as a local member. I think you need to
get rid of all the net zero ideology in your party, the things that are keeping the airports closed and ultimately led to all the misinformation, which meant that your constituents aren't getting really cheap energy from fracking. But, okay, this is going to sound really naughty, but I heard a rumour that you're selling your constituency home, which is the reason why I asked if you were standing again. But that's completely not true. You're definitely standing at the next election.
Oh, absolutely. Well, people sell houses all the time.
Okay, all right,
I think this was a bit mischievous of a few left-wing trolls online who look at my every move around the constituency with fascinating.
Oh, I get trolled as well.
Fascinatingly, it's almost quite disturbing that these people have nothing better to do. I mean, if they had a job at 9 to 5, then clearly they'd probably spend less time on Facebook and Twitter trolling Tory MPs, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. But no, absolutely standing at the next election. I'm moving within the constituency, and for goodness sake, people sell houses all the time.
No, so I'm glad to hear that, especially hearing your stance on... Right, so... It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much. But just a few quick fire questions. Don't worry, I'm not going to get you like Keir Starmer, Davos sort of thing.
No problem. Although that would be an interesting question.
Yeah, he's chose Davos. That's so interesting.
I think that says everything about his priorities.
It really, really does. So, okay, quick fire. Number 1, climate catastrophe or no climate catastrophe?
No climate catastrophe. Overblown. Completely support the line of the previous Republican president of the US.
Number 2, I don't know what you're going to say now because you've got 2 U's on fracking. Right, fracking or no fracking?
No fracking locally, but we do need to have an honest conversation with people about national infrastructure.
Okay, and if they change their minds, the local constituencies. Okay, fracking or wind farms in general?
I would say nuclear.
That's not an option.
It should be an option.
It should be an option. Yeah, but that's only for electricity, not gas.
True.
Yeah, but anyway, a nice juicy steak or a salad?
Oh, for goodness sake, that's a ridiculous question to ask a right-wing Tory MP. Always a steak.
Always
I'm certainly not doing vegan January or whatever nonsense that is.
No, I've been doing dry January and it's coming to an end soon.
Dry January is one thing. Going vegan for the month is a completely different ballgame.
No, completely. You've got to have some passion in your life, haven't you?
You do.
And the final question, thank you so much, is heat or eat?
Both.
Both.
I think the welfare state is more than generous to allow people to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. You've been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.